So we're just prepping up these sheets, and one thing we have to do is the felt lining on the underside, which is an anti-condensation lining. Obviously when you get condensation forming under metal roofing, you get droplets forming which can drip and cause issues. So this prevents that, holds on to the moisture until it's then cleared away by the air movement underneath. But this last little bit here we've had to peel off to make sure that water coming down doesn't wick back up on the underside. We've peeled it off, it's left a bit of fluff, but the one suggestion is that you just lightly blowtorch this from under the underside and it'll singe anything else off. Right, we've got them down now. I think we've almost got enough for one side. What we're deciding now is whether we should try and measure up and mark them up and punch them now, or the other option is just to measure up and mark them just with a crayon. I've got a white crayon, and then that way when they go up we know that that's always going to end up in a straight line. I think that's probably the option rather than risk piloting through them and getting it all wrong. Right, we're back on it, back on the roof today. I'm working solo, but I think it should be alright. At least it's not windy, which is why I've been putting it off. Tape. That's a terrible tape, but we'll take it. I probably need to nip and grab some more screws in a second from down in the workshop, but let me show you what the plan is. So if you remember, for the past, well, for the whole duration of the roof project, I've been using the Norcar, which was the loader, the mini loader, which I could bring down sheets on the forklift, I could lift them over the fence. It was all quite happy days, but the Norcar is gone now. It's been sold, it's gone back to Black Track. So we've got a non-road safe load here. Anyway, I will be walking up this way. I should manage on my own to get them to the top here. Here's the pallet, this is where we were able to lift them over to before. And this is the remaining section of the roof to do, so about 10 meters. One of the very first things to do though is going to be to get our string line set up from here all the way to the other end. So I'm not sure if we touched on it previously, but there would be the option to pre-drill all of these down on the ground and then either pre-drill or just punch them and then bring them up, and that would be it. It doesn't add on too much time to mark them up one at a time as I get them up, and it just gives me that little bit of adjustment if I don't think I need to, but just if something was creeping out I could just change the fixing slightly. And because we're doing it nice and neatly, and with a lot of fixings, probably more than we need, but I'm trying to get it so it aesthetically looks right as well. I've dried off the last ridge, which is where our lap is, so that now I can get on and put a bead of silicone along there. I've been trying to use up all the various silicons and sealants in the workshop because I figured it was a good way to use them up. I've now onto just some standard black silicone, which means that any slight squeeze out is much easier to tidy up and invisible. Because we've gone for an anti-con lining, it means that we want to make sure that this last ridge here, which is what overlaps, you can see it doesn't have the felt on it. And the reason for that is because we don't want the felt anywhere near the edges, because otherwise the moisture can wick up and over. So here is where we're sandwiching the silicone between this sheet and the last, or a butyl or whatever we're using. And you can use tapes as well. There's very little adjustment. Once they're sat down onto the other sheet, you're never going to budge them. So I think I'm going to bring up 3, mark them up, and then fit them, and then repeat. Well, we tried our best to get the other side of the roof done, but weather was not on our side, and rain and wind, and it was not pretty up there. So we decided to call it a day at that point, and I'm pushing on and kind of trying to get those last few sheets on myself whilst I've got a couple of days of good weather. I thought I'd try and answer a few questions now, which may or may not come up in the comments, about why we went for this roofing and a few of the ins and outs of the decision-making process. So we're no strangers to using metal roofing, composite roofing. We've tried lots of different products and different kind of methods in the past. And some of you may have seen that on the channel. We've done the shed and the workshop and other storage sort of buildings using this type of roofing. This is the first time I've used corrugated roofing, apart from using bitumen and nonchaline type stuff. This is a 0.7mm steel roof, so it's the thicker grade out of the two. Normally there's a 0.5 and a 0.7. I went with 0.7 simply because it's far nicer to work with, in as much as when you're walking around on it, moving it, there's far less chance of it getting damaged. Also, being 0.7mm means that our sensors can be a little bit further apart. So in the case of our roof here, where we've got about 3 meters from the ridge down to the eaves, we could get away with just having 3 purlins, and that worked fine. We decided on the corrugated rather than a box profile, mainly because a lot of our buildings here at the farm already have that profile, the sort of corrugated, traditional tin roof type. And I think it suits this sort of building more. A lot of the box profile buildings are either larger buildings or they just have more of a modern look, and we're going to be cladding this with kind of feather edge, and we've got corrugated roof. It kind of ties in with the buildings around it. Not that that was really much of a design decision. However, the corrugated roofing in black looks pretty smart and fits in here on the. Now also you get a couple of options when you come to order metal roofing on the finish, and again we've used 2 different methods in the past. One is the polyester and one is the plastisol. Now the polyester finish is essentially just like a flat sprayed paint finish, and it's okay, and the only main issue I would say is that it can scratch far easier. Now when you buy composite roofing where you've got the insulation bonded to it, it's usually the polyester type finish, so it's actually not the premium finish. What we've gone for here is plastisol, and maybe in the finish video, which will be in a future episode, I'll show you some close-ups of the finish. It's almost a leatherette look to it, so it's slightly textured, but it's basically a film, I think, is how it's applied, and it's almost rubberized. It's far more durable than just the paint. So you can walk around on it, you can move it, slide them if you're careful, and you don't get any of the scratching that you might get with the painted finish. It's a little bit more expensive, but well worth it in my view. So whether you were going to go for the corrugated profile or a box profile, 0.7mm thick and the plastisol finish is definitely our choice, having used all the different combinations before. Now we've also opted to have the underlining, the anti-con or anti-drip lining, and you will have seen during the video, it is bonded to the underside, and it basically means that you don't end up with any droplets forming on the underside, therefore you don't get drips falling on your insulation, and that's where a lot of these problems people have with metal roofs fail. They have either rotten timbers or they have moisture dripping down into their garage or shed or workshop. And really, it's all about airflow, but also that anti-con lining, I think, is a good option. You want to make sure you've got really good airflow, though, for that to work, so it can dry out, so that it holds onto the moisture, and then it can dry out when it gets warm enough and there's enough airflow. In our case, what we've got is airflow pretty much eaves to eaves. Now, a lot of times people use foam fillers at the eaves so that you don't have any gap there. But actually, when you're using an anti-con lining, you do need as much airflow as possible. That has meant that the space of that undulation is still accessible from the eaves, I think, in ours, because we can put vent strips and all sorts in our soffits, but that is for underneath the membrane. So at the moment, when you look up, there are gaps that are probably big enough for a bird to get into. So we may look at some sort of comb filler and try and retrofit something in there afterwards. But for me, it's all about getting as much airflow as possible. That's all on the cold side, so it doesn't affect our insulation at all. It doesn't create cold washing. It's going up. It's above the membrane. It's just making sure that that steel is always dry and well ventilated underneath. Now, my next question I'm going to predict is noise. And we've literally just had monsoon weather for the last 2 days here, so I can give you a fairly good indication of how it's performing. On this end of the cabin where I am now, we've got 150mm of Kingspan PIR insulation, most of it between the rafters and some underneath. Now, although we haven't got windows and some of the noise will be coming in that way, I could hear it. Not a high-pitched tin roof annoying sound, but you could definitely hear it. Nowhere near as bad as a conservatory or anything like that. But as soon as we moved into the rest of it, where we've got about 400mm of mineral wool, soft insulation, filling the whole roof void, completely dead. Like, you could not hear a single thing. So I think it can be used, and a lot of barn conversions are going to have aspects of kind of metal roofing or metal cladding, and I don't think the noise is an issue, but I would incorporate some amount of soft insulation. So in this case, if the roof had allowed for it, I probably would have done a full fill between the rafters and then put PIR underneath, or in the ideal world, put all of the insulation on top and just have a warm roof. And then that way you shouldn't have, the insulation, the roof is much further away from the rooms underneath. In the past, on the workshop, we used 100mm or 80mm insulated roofing panels. And that is a fairly deadened sound, but you can still hear the rain. So, I don't know, either embrace it or maybe just factor in the insulation when you're choosing whether or not you should use a metal roof. And then finally, what were our options for a roof? What were the alternatives? Well, this, obviously, metal sheets is an easy way to go. It's fairly quick to install, and it's easy to price up. It's a per square metre price. They're made and cut to length, made and cut to order, and delivered here. So that was a good option. The other option for metal roofing is Metro tiles. My parents have got an outbuilding with that on. It's a metal run, maybe a metre long, of a tile effect. It's got a textured finish to it. So it actually doesn't look anything like the sort of fake tile effect you get with some of these big roofing sheets, but it does require a lot of battens and many more components. I did price it up, it was quite a bit more, but having been on there for about 20 years at my parents' house, it still looks really good, and it's aged and weathered, and it looks, unless you're up there and you can tap it or whatever, it looks pretty legit as far as it looks very similar to just having a concrete tiled roof. Apart from that, the only other option would have been to use Onduline or something like that if we were looking for a sheet material, and I'm not a big fan of that. Maybe for a stable or a field shelter or a shed, but not for a house like this. There are buildings like this that are built as cabins on chassis or on bases that do go ahead and use slate or clay tiles or concrete tiles. But in our case, where we're on a chassis with wheels, with the intention to move it, with the intention to sell it potentially at some point, that would have added probably, I would guess, about 3 tons to the build. And I would also guess that moving it becomes a little bit more hazardous because it's going to end up on the back of a lorry, and concrete tiles, I'm not sure how that would work. But in theory, you should be building in a method that would sustain, those high winds anyway and be fine. So with the truss clips and the amount of fixings and things like we're using, if it is fine for an 80-mile-an-hour wind hitting it, well, a lorry going down the motorway is not going to go 80 miles an hour. So I would hope that any construction methods that you use would be fine for transport reasons. But anything that was loose tiles or anything like that might just be a little bit more risky. EPDM, fiberglass, not really an option with a pitch roof like this. And well, you probably could, but I'm not sure how good it would look. Anyway, that's the thought process behind it. I know a lot of you will probably skip this part of the video, but at the end of the videos, I think sometimes it's a good idea to put in a bit more info for people who actually have those questions or are interested in why we picked the route we go. It's all well and good doing, happy clappy time lapses, start to finish, but actually sometimes people want the information. So that is our thought process, our design process that we went through to come to this decision. I don't know if it's the right option, but I think it looks pretty smart from the outside. And hopefully when I get that last little stretch finished down the other end, and then we get the trims on, it should be a pretty kind of faultless belts and braces roof. There's not really many failure points, especially with corrugated, because all your fixings are going on top of the corrugations, so even less chance of anything getting in. Now, final point on the roof, because from the drone shots you might have seen it, all the fixings are not in yet. We decided on a pattern which is pretty much every other corrugation, and I think that's probably overkill. I don't think we needed to do quite as many as that, but I couldn't. We sat there for ages up on the roof trying to work out a regular way that it. Some people do 3 grouped together and then 1 in the center of the sheet. I wanted a few more than that, especially at the eaves. And then, anyway, so we've got those drone shots. There's a few bits missing. We've got to go back in and fire all those in. And then at that point, we've got a huge number of fixings on the roof, and we've got to go along and put the caps on all of those. That's one of the downsides. On the workshop roof, we've got stitcher screws, which had a pre-formed, moulded, colour-coded cap on them, and it used a special bit. It was only on the stitcher screws. But I think I would try and hunt those down for the whole roof next time, because there's no chance that they're going to pop off. When we've gone with the plastic colour-coded caps in the past, it's only, every couple of months you look down the garden and you can see one bright, shiny bolt or a roofing screw there because the caps come off, and they're just annoying things. But maybe a little dab of adhesive or something on them. But 500 or 600 of those caps have got to go on at some point. And then it should all just blend away, become black. Ridge trim's got to go on, barge board's got to go on, and then we are done on the roof. Except guttering, and rain is just sheeting off this roof at the moment. Right, the next video on the channel, I'm not 100% sure what that's going to be, but as soon as I get a dry day, I'll be up finishing that roof. Otherwise, I've got all this to show you. We've managed to get about 90% of the whole building plasterboarded, or panelled or boarded, ready now. So a bit of plastering to go. Joe's been insulating. Things are slowly but surely moving along. James has just been around he spent the morning here getting the last bit of first fix in. There was a few extra sockets. We hadn't done the kitchen design last time. May as well show you that because it's not going to be a separate video. So where we've got OSB on the back, we've used metal boxes, and actually it's probably better. Actually, someone in a previous video mentioned about where you've got, 400 spacings or even 600 spacings in a stud wall, where you're pushing the boxes. If you're using drywall boxes, if they're sockets that are used a lot, you can get a bit of a failure point there. So things like in the kitchen here, where mainly things are going to be plugged in and out quite a lot, these boxes are on the back board, so there's no give. We're not relying on the we're not relying on the plasterboard. I'll give you the quick walk around. So there's a switch there for an outside light. There's a new double socket down in the bottom corner there, and also potentially the underfloor heating. It's still, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on it. This end, we're going to have the wood burner. All the rooms have got small electric radiators, all on a smart system. Up here in the main living area, we've got the option of either putting in a couple of decent sized electric radiators or underfloor. And I think from a comfort level, underfloor would be great. I've just not used it before, which is why I'm reserved on using electric underfloor. It would have to be the foil type, and we're going to be using an LVT click type flooring. So if anyone's got any combo suggestions for what might work there, of course we're going to need a thin insulation layer. The underlay would have to go underneath the foil underfloor heating and then a click flooring. Whereas a lot of the previous click flooring we were looking at had the underlay built into it, and it would have gone straight onto this stuff. And the other thing I can think is we just leave them as fuse spurs where we're going to put electric radiators and the wood burner, and the combination of those and all the insulation might be enough rather than having anything underfloor. Double sockets down there, which just got a plasterboard that last corner over there, and then another double socket, and finally a fuse spur there, because of course if we do underfloor heating, it's got to be two zones. It's going to be each half, and for that reason everything has to be split. It can't be one big zone. I think it was the wise decision to try and go mainly electric in here, so that as we get solar we can supplement it in here, and of course we can be on different tariffs and stuff. Yes, electric's gone crazy, but I think everything's just crazy, so we're just embracing it. Insulation, woolly jumpers, that's all we need. We'll be fine. Kitchen's ordered. It's going to be a waiting game for that now, so we should be able to get all these taped and jointed and painted. Flooring can go in, ceiling paneling can go in. The guys have just finished off these. These are basically the two looms for each half, so they are now signed off. Well, not signed off, but they're checked over. So that's everything we need to connect one cabin to the other, and there'll be an access panel in here for that. And then the utilities, the one room we're thinking we're going to hold off on. So we've got the back of the kitchen there. So we've got plumbing to put in for a fridge freezer. Got the power for that, wall oven, induction hob. So we figured we'd leave this till right at the end, and what we will do is probably make that a panelled wall, because that's going to be where all the boots and coats and stuff are. We kind of randomly segued away from roofing there, but hopefully you can see that things are moving along. Loads of videos coming. We're just trying to work out what order to put them out in, because we've kind of run ahead of ourselves and started plasterboarding and plastering and ordering furniture and stuff before we've even finished the roof. I know it's not the right way to do it, but we just got to work with the weather. Wrong time of year to be building anyway. So next video will either be roofing or more plasterboarding. Hope you enjoyed that. If you've got any questions on the roofing, then just let us know, because I think it is a good route to go. And I know a lot of people are using metal roofing on domestic properties and habitable spaces. And I think it's got a good argument for it because, like I said, it's durable, it's long lasting, it's easy to install, it's easy to replace as well. That's one thing to remember, that if this had been a permanent building and in 10, 20, 30 years time we wanted to change the colour of the roof or the profile of the roof, it's a case of just undoing the screws, lifting it off. Of course you'd have the adhesive to break away, but it would come off. If you go to any agricultural auctions or anything like that, you'll know that the resale value for tin roofing is insane. The rustier the better. Corrugated stuff, interior designers love it. So there's always a repurpose use for it. you know, it'll have the fixing holes, but someone will make use of it and line their new timbers up with it. So I would say, as far as a decent longevity, it can be recycled, reused. It's got a lot of plus points. So we are using that as a bit of a launch pad for what we decide to do on the house build in the future. But the jury's still out on what style and what approach we'll take. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you for watching. Remember, if you can, do it yourself, and we'll see you next time.